context is helpful, and thanks for having it in Foro today, Mako. So Masters Track and Field is quite simply track and field for athletes 35 and older, and there are 5-year age groups, and typically you're competing within your own age group. Many of us also compete in what's called open competitions, competing against people of any age, but yeah, my focus is competing against folks my age.
And you're doing sprints.
Right, yeah.
That's your particular discipline.
Right, so I focus on the long sprints, 200 and 400 meters. I also run the 100 meters sometimes, and in rare occasions, 800 meters.
So what I know, little I know from watching the Olympics, is that 400 is like the killer race, right? It's when your body oxygen literally runs out on you.
Yeah.
That's what I hear. Is that true?
It's a very challenging race, to be sure, and maybe that's what makes it more rewarding when you can do well, because it's very hard to do a flat-out sprint for 400 meters. And I know we've got some folks who are familiar with track and field. For those who aren't so familiar, so conceptually, what I want to do is so simple. It's run one lap of a standard track as fast as possible. So that seems pretty simple, but I've been spending the better part of the last 2 decades trying to do that, and I'm learning all the time. And
let's wind back, and now hearing that, most of us will assume you always ran track, and you were, in high school you were running track, but that's not true. You began this journey.
That's right.
After a doctor's visit.
Yes.
Apparently. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I've always enjoyed athletics, and I played sports of various kinds growing up, mostly team sports, football and basketball. I went to a small high school that at the time did not have a track and field team. And so I didn't have that opportunity. I knew I was relatively fast. And unusually in college, I actually threw the javelin, so I was on the track and field team, but I wasn't doing probably pursuing my highest and best use athletically. I just didn't know it. So, this is in some ways a lesson of keep trying to find what you're best at. But yes, to your point, Mako, I had a basketball injury in my early 20s, and I tore my anterior cruciate ligament. And I spent 15 years of my life without an anterior cruciate ligament. It was completely severed, and they removed it surgically. And I was still able to do some things athletically, wearing a knee brace, but I did a lot more cycling and things like that. Some running, and then in 2002, in that same knee, I tore a meniscus ligament just jogging, and I went to see the knee surgeon, and he said, well, we can do in the 15 years since your first surgery, the technology has improved some, and we can create a facsimile anterior cruciate ligament for me. We're going to take a piece of your hamstring tendon out and fold it over and put it in there, and with lots and lots of physical therapy, basically make you as close to new as possible as we can. So I endured 8 or 9 months of very intense physical therapy, and towards the end of that, I said to my surgeon, because I was very nervous about this, wondering what I'd be able to do after that. And he said, yep, you can bike, that's really good, it's gentle on the joints, and you can walk a lot, and you can do this and that. I said, well, what about running? He said, you probably shouldn't run. So I think my whole track career kind of pivots on that one word, probably. If you told me you definitely shouldn't run anymore, I guess I would have followed doctor's orders. But I kept doing my therapy, and I didn't run for 2 whole years after that. But because my father-in-law and my brother-in-law and another good friend of mine who became my training partner had gotten me interested in Masters Track and Field, after that 2-year period, I started just to mix in with the other things I was doing athletically. Running first once a month, then twice a month, then once a week, then twice a week, gradually over 5 years, with the idea that I'd test my knee and see if I could actually get out there and compete. So I kind of had that gentle ramping up of my training for 5 years before I even entered my first race.
I mean, when you think about most of our lives, you know, at that point in your age and your in your life experience, most of us will wind down, although athletic training. You just started.
Yeah.
Then, especially being told that you cannot run, and you had these people who influence you. But what I'm curious is training for 400, 800 is really hard. I mean, I saw you running up the hill, and you have literally a trainer pushing you, and I was just astonished that this person can do that, no matter regardless of the age. But now, having heard your story a little bit, it just seems like every moment, every race, every even training session is something more than just accomplishing a task, and that there's something deeply meaningful about even the challenges you face, physically challenges you face. Tell us more about how that process works. How do you get ready for a race? How do you, align yourself to this new lifestyle?
Yeah, so a good question. I think another little piece of the background or context that I want to share is that not only did in my early 20s I have that knee injury, but in my mid-30s I had a herniated disc in my back, and that was very debilitating, and I had to go to physical therapy for that, and it, spent maybe 8 months going to the physical therapist 3 times a week, and it was, even walking was difficult at that time. So I mention that because I did learn that physical therapy works if you're diligent about it. I didn't require any surgery, but it also gave me a great sense of, once I got on the other side of that, a great sense of gratitude, like for my physical gifts and just the ability, it just gave me so much appreciation that I could do stuff, and without pain. And so that's a really important thing to understand as you think about the training. So my whole journey is really one of trying to appreciate the gifts I have, and I don't think I could appreciate them in the same way had I not gone through those hardships. And so that makes me just more focused on doing the most I can, achieving as much as possible. I know that for a lot of people, this is like a children's game, right? I mean, it is, in the scheme of the world, it's not important, but as a personal pursuit for me, it's very important. And I'm really, as somebody who grew up playing mostly team sports and enjoying those very much, being more in an individual sport, it's interesting because some people think of as the competitor as the guy in the next lane, but the competitor is yourself as much as anything else. So it takes a lot of discipline to focus and know that really it's more about what I do in preparation determines how well I will do in a competition. And so I think about that a lot, not just in terms of when I'm training, but even, what I'm eating and how I sleep and things like that. So it does encourage a pretty healthy lifestyle. But to your question about training, I take the training seriously because I know there's no way to do well on the track if you're not very diligent. And I'm very fortunate to have a training partner for the last 14 years or so, who's more experienced, more knowledgeable, and he happens to be a 75-year-old molecular biology professor at Princeton, but he's a guy who's been sprinting competitively almost 65 years with almost very few interruptions. So we get along great, and I've learned a lot from him.
So walk us through your training, schedule. Just give us an idea of what it takes to be at this level.
Yeah. So it's interesting because you have to train hard, but you also have to recover. So Mako should have mentioned, I compete in what's called the M60 age group, so I'm 62 years old. And so you do need to recover some, but typically I'm on the track 2 or 3 days a week, not every day, but I do some workout every day, year round. But for the sprints, there's other things that one needs to do. You can't, if I were doing sprinting every day, it would just beat up my body too much. So I have to do cross training. I do things like cycling, and I lift weights. Oftentimes I do something called pool running, where I'm doing simulated running in a pool, which is a good recovery workout. It's gentler on the joints, and so that allows me to get in more workouts per week than I could really do on the track. But it's unlike, I think, a lot of you who don't run. I know we have some good athletes even in this audience, folks who've ridden bicycles hundreds of miles or run marathons. It's a different kind of training than endurance training. So 400-meter runners are interested in something called speed endurance, maintaining a very high speed for as long as possible. So my workouts on the track are more interval workouts, where I'm running, say, 250 or 300 meters several times with shorter rest. So kind of to simulate what the race would be like.
What about things you eat, things outside of pushing your body? How do you recover from training?
Yeah, I think sleep's very important for recovery. So I try to be pretty diligent about my sleep schedule. And I have some massage rollers and things like that, just to keep the sore muscles, get them a little bit supple and things.
When you're traveling, you have to be creative about stretching.
Yeah, traveling makes it more difficult, and the more time zones you get away from home, the tougher it is. Yeah. So, but I realize if I go to a bigger competition, other people are going to have the same problem. So I try not to focus on that, but I'll do everything I can to, say, get a hotel room in a quiet place, or make sure I can sleep, and try and find, good food and that kind of thing. So
basically, your entire life is, arranged around racing.
To some degree, what I'll tell you is it's a nice complement. My work can be in the investment world can be somewhat stressful at times, and so what's good is that when I'm competing, and even when I'm training, my mind is completely on the task at hand. So I'm not thinking about anything else. I'm just utterly in the moment at that time, and that's very mentally relaxing. I think that's a healthy thing.
I wonder if there's spiritual discipline that can be attached to what you just said.
Yeah.
Because most of us, our daily lives are filled with disruptions and social media, and we were just talking about it with Dr. Walton, but we're so stressed out with trying to do as students, as workers, as mothers and fathers, so many tasks that, and plus that, right, we have life challenges as you have went through. We have setbacks, we have issues that we're trying to manage. So what is that discipline? Now I want to kind of also phrase this in a funny way, which is you were very excited when you got to 60.
Yes, it's true.
I mean, most of us when we turned, next we add number, we're like, we have to slow down, we have to not do certain things, we have to, but why were you so excited?
Yeah, well, it's funny. That's true. The kind of the beauty of the whole master's track and field construct is that you're essentially reborn every year, right? Because often the people who are doing the best in a particular age group are the folks in their first year or two, because aging is a real thing, but even though some of us who do this are fighting against it physically, so trying to swim upriver, which is very difficult. But yeah, there's, there are rankings and there are competitions, and so it's very tough to do well at a high level when you're near the top of your age group. So it's fair to say, Mako, that when I turned 60 2 summers ago, I was probably the happiest man in America. Yeah, and I knew also that there was a national championship coming up just a couple weeks after that. So I was going to be the young guy there because I had spent the prior year or two being the old guy. So it happens to work out very well that way.
It's amazing. So going back to focus, which you must have, now is that in some way? I'm wondering. There's just thought occurred to me that when you go through pain, or you're recovering from injury, or even simply just pushing yourself to the limits, you pay more attention to your body, right? In a sense, because of pain involved. Now we started out saying, when I run, I feel God's pleasure, but it's also true that when you run, you feel God's pain.
Right. I feel the pleasure more in the first half of the race, then it starts getting difficult.
Right, especially in 400.
And towards the end, it definitely.
Right. So what does that discipline tell us about, just in general terms, but has helped you to apply that to other parts of your life?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think that for me, track has been a great teacher. Not only, and I learned from a lot of my peers as well. But so there's a couple of things I think that are applicable that come right to the top of my head about other aspects of life. And one thing I've learned is that very few worthwhile things in life are easy. It's just quite clear to me, that, and probably another thing that track has taught me, lost my train of thought. Basically to grow or to excel, right? You have to be, this is the paradox, and it's really very fundamental, I've learned. You have to be comfortable being uncomfortable, right? So the 400 meters as a race is going to be uncomfortable if you've done well, right? So if your training is extremely good, you'll be less uncomfortable than the next. But if you're watching runners coming down the home stretch in the 400, everybody's going to be hurting, right? And so I just think there's a lot that you can take from that experience and apply to life generally,
Yeah, 2 Timothy 4:7, Paul. Now speaking to younger Timothy, discipling, trying to raise him up in faith, says, there's a very moving words by Paul. I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, and I have kept the faith. Do you identify with Paul there?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and that really makes me think of relay races, which are my favorite part of the sport, because I think a relay race, so I run several times a year on a relay team in the 4x400 meters, and I think that's a great metaphor for many aspects of life, whether, we can think about, for example, our parish, and from generation to generation, we're trying to improve it and pass the baton to the next generation, and or even within our own families, that's something of a relay race. Hopefully those relays are endless, but so I can identify with that.
Yeah, what a beautiful metaphor to think about our lives as being relay races, passing on to the next generation, but we have to do our part, and it's hard training, as well as grace that permeates through that. Let's talk a little bit about what it is like to represent the United States of America in a race.
Yeah, well, that's it's thrilling, I'll say. But I think that the really two words that come to mind are humbling and inspiring. You know, the United States is really a tremendous track and field power, like we saw at the Olympics. We've got this great collegiate system, and obviously we're a big country, but it is a sport that got a lot of terrific athletes in, and so it's just, you know, for me, I certainly don't have a big ego about competing for Team USA because I see the very best, and it's awe-inspiring to see what people can do at every age, you know, and so it gets me fired up to see what's possible.
Yeah, one of the things that you shared with me was that you actually there's a whole community of people who, like yourself, are training every day to compete at the highest level, and you have met some amazing people, and you have some really interesting stories about those people. So let's end with that, and we'll take Q&A here. But
sure.
Yeah,
the list is very long of people I've met. I think I'm glad you asked that, Mako, because the camaraderie and the friendship has become a big part of my experience now. And so when I go to a bigger meet, one of the things I just look forward to is seeing my friends. I made so many interesting friends. I think there's a lot of mutual respect in this community.
Yeah.
So generally in track and field, the level of sportsmanship is very high, and that's something I really appreciate. When it comes to running on a relay, you know, particularly at the international level, like my guys that were on my USA relay team, I've been competing against them for years, and mostly losing. So I was the slow guy on our relay team. So shout out to my teammates who are spectacular winners. But yeah, in terms of people I met, the list is so long. I think of a woman named Jeannie Rice. She's a 75-year-old marathoner who got 7 gold medals at the recent World Championships in Sweden. The list is just so long. So it's wonderful to, you know, trade training tips with folks and hear their stories. And a lot of people have also overcome various illnesses and physical issues. So, you know, those things are very inspiring to me, and I more and more the friendships I've made, you know, are a big part of why I keep doing this.
Yeah, and it seems the competition is at such a high level, but it's also the discipline that you share with your competitors, right? Becomes a way to bond, and you're traveling to do this. You also told me about this lady who actually did the Olympics at the same time. She was in, I forget what her age was, but
yeah, we had in Sweden at the World Championships last month, we did have a number of athletes on Team USA who were prior Olympians. So I think that's not the norm, but there are some, and on other teams as well. So that's pretty remarkable. In fact, there's one fellow who I met there I hadn't been aware of before, who's 60, and he competed in June at the U.S. Olympic trials as a race walker.
Wow.
Right? So he was an Olympian himself twice as a young man, but was still good enough to qualify to compete against the younger folks in the race walk at age 60. So he, although he didn't make the Olympic team, it's insane that a guy that age would be able to be like one of the top 20 race walkers in the country. So,
Oh, amazing. So just in reflecting on this, I thought about the relationship between the hardness of training, the pain that you endure, but also how, if we were to look at God's image of us as God's children, going through, and seeing how that is mirrored because of what Jesus had to endure, right, to the cross that we celebrate here at the table, that there is some sense in which even pain is connected with God's pain at a deeper level. And it's something that I was reflecting on as, as Paul says, God's strength is made perfect in our weakness. And it seems like your beginning of this journey to begin this training and hoping that you can run again, and then pushing yourself to have gotten to a place, a very high level, but also just the reflection on that, of ability to create new moments and new ways of looking at the future, even dealing with our aging bodies as an opportunity, right, in a sense. It just stands out to me as something that we can all share in, and perhaps next time we have a conversation, we can talk about your travel experience, because you have traveled a lot.
Well, speaking of my travel, I've had the good fortune of living abroad 3 times, and each time that I did that, I knew that those, stays would be a couple of years, so finite going into it, and I think that has helped me appreciate also making the most of every opportunity, because when you kind of are aware that the clock is ticking, you're going to do more and make more of your time. And another thing that you remind me of is just, when there's definitely, in referring to the painful aspect of what I do. Basically, I say a prayer before every race, but one of the things I'm trying to do is just honor the gift I have received, and if you want me to articulate, well, what is that gift? I think there's 2 aspects to it. Well, it's my body. I feel like all of us have an inner athlete that is great, that just as we have many other talents, artistic or intellectual, that we can release. So I'm trying to find that talent, but more just this earthly life is a gift too. So I just want to honor the gift every time I run and make the most of that opportunity.
Thank you, Matt. And that's, I'm sure you have questions. Adam, go ahead.
The subject is nature versus nurture. The guy that's 60 and is still a competitive race walker. My question is, in your opinion, did Darwin really give him the nurture thing up? Or, in that regard, what's your view of the nature-nurture mix in your world?
Yeah.
If that's possible.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think some of us are suited towards different athletic disciplines naturally based on having, say, fast twitch or slow twitch muscles. I've often thought about asking some of my peers, well, what do you think is a genetic or God-given gift versus your own hard work? So whatever, but I don't know what that answer is, whether it's 50-50 or 80-20 or 20-80. I know that if you have a gift, it takes an awful lot of hard work. So I think there are people out there who aren't taking advantage. We all have some gift, and it took me a long time to figure out where I was kind of best suited athletically. So I feel like I'm in my highest and best use athletically. It's hard for me to say where it falls.
It's interesting, just before we go to the next question, just to flag that, because you mentioned how few Olympians are competing and how amazing that is. But I think about the reverse, like how many athletes, right, pro football players, right, who end their career and their body's shot, they cannot compete again, right? So the other side of the picture is, even if you're gifted physically, it doesn't mean necessarily to be in your 60s,
Right.
you're competing.
No, it's true. Well, some sports are harder on the body.
Yeah.
Football in particular,
Yeah.
there are a few, run into a few former pro football players who are on the Masters track circuit. Not many, because most have beat up bodies somewhere else. But most of the folks that I compete with, they may have been like collegiate athletes, but not all, and certainly very few professional athletes. So the folks that I run into at Olympians, that's the exception, not the rule.
Yeah, amazing. Reed and then Peter.
Yeah, so I was thinking about it. It's kind of a side benefit as we often discuss it every 5 years. You can look forward to becoming a year older.
Yeah.
And so, how long? What is kind of the ultimate? How long can you see that continue?
Right.
Are they going into the? Does it go into the 90s?
Yeah, so the top age group is 100. So then at 105, there's not a separate age group. So I aspire to compete in that age group. My maternal grandfather lived to be just shy of his 101st birthday. So we'll see, but I also know that any race could be my last. I think that's true for even younger athletes, right? But I'm more conscious of my mortality and just the fact that I could get injured, right? And so there's some attrition along the way now that I've been doing this for a decade and a half. Sometimes so I would love to just keep going, and that's what I'll try to do. Yeah.
Can I ask one quick?
Yeah.
So the other question I have is that it's interesting. One of the other benefits is just the being able to meet and get to know on a personal level some of your competitors within the U.S. But I was thinking about internationally. Are you able to establish kind of a personal relationship with competitors from other countries that you see maybe at each of the international events?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a lot of fun. I'm about a year and a half ago. I was at the Indoor World Championships in Poland, and after the meet, I took the train back to Warsaw to fly home, and I sat with a Spanish gentleman who's 85 plus, and he had a couple gold medals and a silver medal around his neck. So we struck up a conversation because we had a long ride together, and we arranged to get together in Sweden in August. And I've been corresponding with him and encouraging him to come to the States, but I made a special effort to go see him compete in his age group's 400-meter final in horrendously cold, windy conditions. And this is the inspiring part for me. Like, these guys are tough as nails, and he got a silver medal, and I was able to take a bunch of pictures of that. And so, he's what I want to be when I grow up. It's a stretch, for sure. But so it's great fun, these relationships that you can make.
So, Peter.
Actually, a collection of goldfinches is a charm.
Charm, yes, I knew there was a word for that. Thank you.
My question revolves around, I think, a very difficult thing for a lot of us is the self-discipline involved in training. It's, having control of ourselves is really very difficult at every age. And in terms of training for an athletic pursuit, you have to really want to do it. You often have goals, a race that you're working towards. And it's very difficult. I think, so my question though is, what you're doing in sprinting, Matt, tends to be on a track, often but not always indoors. Some of the things that I've done a little bit of is in terms of biking, but really also long distance running, you really get to be outdoors. And in some sense, I think being outdoors when you're going through that difficult process of training yourself and saying, I've got to do this to do this, there's an advantage because you're going outside.
Right.
For me, how do you balance the fact that often your training requires that you be indoors and you don't get to go outside and see the leaves fall and so forth?
Good question. Well, I love the outdoors, and I love to do outdoors stuff, including hiking and biking and things like that. So, yeah, there are times, often on Sundays after church, I'll go to the weight room at the university, and it could be a nice day, and I don't really want to be inside, but I just do it because I've committed to doing that as part of my training. But the majority of my training is outdoors still. I prefer to be outdoors. I do have access to the indoor track at the university, so if it's icy or snowy, but I definitely put up with the elements, good and bad, and I enjoy very much being outside if I can be outside. So sometimes I just have to buckle down and do that indoor workout, and I'll do it.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how to phrase this, but how do athletics, sports relate to beauty? Or another way of asking would be, why do you think God gives us athletics? Why does God give us? So I could answer as a musician. My philosophy or theology is that we hear Beethoven, we hear Mozart, we hear the choir, and it's in some way that the beauty in that brings us closer to God. The kind of Darwinian side of me would say that sports are sublimated warfare, right? And so it's the battle on the football field is it's keeping us from hurting each other in the streets,
Right.
theoretically. But I'm wondering if there's more. I think there is more than just sublimated warfare in athletic competitions. But I'm just curious if you've thought about how that what that gift, because you said it is a gift, right? There are musical gifts, there are intellectual gifts, there are artistic gifts, there are athletic gifts, and so these are things that God has given us talents, and for a reason. And I would assume that God has given us these athletic talents for a reason more than just so we can win a literal battle against warring tribes. So I don't know what your thoughts are.
I'd probably be asking you that question, but so yeah, there is maybe something to the notion that athletic competitions are kind of stylized warfare, but I think, particularly in track and field, if you were to be a carefully observant fan, you'd see that the camaraderie is so great. So athletes are trying to push each other very hard, and that makes us better, right? But yeah, in one sense, I'm trying to make the other guy hurt more than me. It's that simple. But this is not permanent damage. Nobody gets brain damage or anything. So, and then what I think the thing that would really stand out, is that the camaraderie is so great, the respect is so great. So, in some sense, you're trying to kill each other on the track, and then those two athletes, 10 seconds later are hugging, right? So it's, that's sort of a thing, that's what God wants us to do, right? Like that's maybe the most important part of the race.
Yeah, and that question goes back to Dr. Walton's talk about what are we, racing for, and even how we places context and perspective on what we do every day to compete, to win, to and it seems like I just thought of this, but when it is a warfare like college football, it is clearly damaging to your body. It's proven that it's dangerous. Then the endurance of that is less than what it could be if we see sports as a way, let's say, to create peace. To have, that's the Olympic spirit, but nevertheless there are complex tensions that we live in. But what I felt like, at least in the series that we could bring out, is how as a church can we be a community that encourages each other to both train hard, to the work of certainly faith, but also in life, right? To be able to have the discipline of doing that, but also, can we turn what is a warfare into something that is more nurturing and something that all of us can benefit from? So it's not just Matt running out on the field, but it's all of us running that race, and then how do we view that as, especially when we can't run or we can't compete in the way that he can, but when we realize that our weakness, again, is made perfect in God's strength. So how do we not compete in the way that the world competes, but how do we together as a community compete in a way that perhaps God is wanting his body to compete, which is to honor each other, honor each other's stories, but also the struggles that we go through. And it's that prayer that of being in gratitude for the gifts that we have been given. And facing challenges, illnesses or challenges, can we be a community that pushes into that a little bit with faith, and to say that, because of what you're going through, we can certainly be present in that together, and to have moments of gratitude, have moments of sharing like this. So I'm looking at the time here, so we'll have to close, but I'm really looking forward to, did you enjoy this conversation? Yeah, and if you did, think of inviting somebody to our next conversation. We have Dr. John Fleming coming up. We have Roma. We just had a wonderful conversation in his home studio nearby, and I want to somehow bring that conversation here about art and making, but also about grief and how we get through life in a way that pays attention to those things well. I just spoke to Erin LaCroix, who's a Broadway. She's Christine in The Phantom, who is our neighbor, happens to be, and a person filled with faith. So she's going to be here in about a month, I believe, and she will be actually sharing her time singing in worship and sharing her journey as a Christian, what it means to have faith on Broadway. So there are many opportunities, and I hope recording will go in a way of helping you to keep in touch, but also to share that with your friends, and perhaps there's an opportunity through various ways. We have multiple events and worship services that we can be friendly to outsiders. So